Hi, my name is Rachel Donovan. I was born in a small coastal town in Maine where winters feel like they're made to test you. Salt air that freezes on your lips, snowbanks that tower higher than your mailbox, and neighbors who still wave at you from their porches even when they know all your business. Last Christmas Eve, my family gathered at my parents' house like we always did. It was the kind of tradition people on the outside might envy. Lights twinkling on the porch, pine wreath on the door, the smell of roasted turkeys spilling into the cold night air. But for me, the whole thing carried the weight of a bad dream I couldn't wake from. Inside, the kitchen was warm and close. The oven hummed, steam clouded the windows, and my mother barked quiet orders over the clatter of pots. My father sat in his armchair in the living room, television blaring the football game, his eyes glazed the way they always were when the family was together. And my younger brother, Ethan, was leaning against the fridge, a can of beer in one hand, that smirk on his face, the one that always made me brace for whatever came next. It should have been a safe night. It should have been about family, but I should have known better. It started with a simple question. I was rinsing dishes at the sink, stacking them in the rack, when I said over my shoulder, "So, Ethan, I heard Mom and Dad sign the house over to you. Is that true?" I didn't ask it like an accusation. I wasn't trying to pick a fight. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was hurt. I'd been the one who moved back to town when Dad had his first stroke. I'd been the one to drive Mom to every oncology appointment last spring. And yet, no one thought I deserved to know. Ethan didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip from his beer, then looked at me with that lazy grin. "Why do you care? You never really lived here after high school. You've been too good for this place since you left." I dried my hands on a dish towel, keeping my voice even. "That's not true. I was working. I was always here when it mattered," he scoffed. "Flying in from Boston every now and then doesn't count as being here, Rach." I turned off the faucet, faced him fully. "All I'm saying is, if it's about family property, maybe we all should have been part of the conversation." And then it happened. 1 second, I was standing by the counter. The next, my back slammed into the refrigerator door so hard the magnets rattled to the floor. Before I could breathe, his knee came up and crashed into my face. Pain exploded behind my eyes, white, blinding, merciless. My ears rang. My legs gave out. The floor was cold tile beneath me, slick from something I couldn't see yet. Somewhere, I could still hear the football announcer's voice from the living room. No one had turned the volume down. I tasted blood, metallic, sharp, and tried to push myself up. My left eye was already swelling. I stumbled toward the phone on the wall by the back door, my body moving on instinct. My hands were shaking so badly the buttons blurred. I pressed 9, then 1. A sharp yank ripped the phone from my grip. It hit the floor with a crack. "Stop it," my mother hissed. She was standing right there, her face calm like I'd just knocked over a glass of water. "It's just a scratch. You always make such a scene." "It's not a scratch," I whispered. She didn't flinch. "You always do this, Rachel. Always turning things into drama." Behind her, my father never even looked away from the TV. "There she goes again," he muttered. "Our little drama queen." I stood there swaying, one eye nearly swollen shut, blood dripping onto the front of my sweater. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fridge behind me. Ethan hadn't moved. Neither had they. That's when I saw it, on the floor near the baseboard. My silver necklace, the one I'd worn to every nursing shift for the last 5 years. A patient had given it to me the night she died. It had snapped during the scuffle and lay in a thin smear of blood. No one noticed. No one cared. That necklace meant something to me. It was proof I'd mattered to someone once, just not here. I bent down, picked it up with trembling fingers, and shoved it into my pocket. I didn't say another word. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The cold wind hit me like a slap. For a second, I almost turned back. half hoping someone would follow, ask if I was okay, offer to take me to the ER. But the door creaked shut behind me. I wiped the blood from my mouth with my sleeve and stood under the porch light staring out at the snow-dusted street. My breath came in short, white bursts. "They don't see me," I said aloud, and then softer, with a steel I hadn't heard in my own voice in years. "They don't see me, but they're going to hear me." The walk to my car felt longer than it was. My boots crunched over frozen gravel, the sound too loud in the stillness. I slid behind the wheel, fingers stiff against the steering wheel. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared altogether, swallowed by the darkness of the coastal night. My reflection in the glass was a stranger. One eye nearly closed, lips split, skin already blooming in bruises. Somewhere deep in my chest, the ache shifted. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was something sharper, something that, for the first time in years, felt like resolve. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, not yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this be just another scene they could laugh off. This time, I was going to make sure the silence ended with me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the wind howling off the Atlantic, rattling my apartment windows. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes the night before replayed in sharp, jagged flashes. Ethan's knee connecting with my face, my mother's flat voice, my father's muttered dismissal. I sat at the edge of my bed, gingerly touching the side of my face. The swelling had spread, pushing against my eye socket. The skin was a deep plum color, the kind of bruise that only gets uglier before it fades. I felt it in my back, too, a dull ache where I'd slammed into the fridge. I shuffled into the bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror didn't pull punches. There I was, Rachel Donovan, 34 years old, registered nurse, someone who could stay calm through a car crash or a cardiac arrest. And yet, in my parents' kitchen, I had been reduced to silence with a single blow and a few well-practiced insults. I braced my hands against the counter and took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time. The thought hit hard, heavy as a wave. My brain had been pushing it away all night, but now there it was, cold and certain. This wasn't just last night. This had been my whole life. The earliest memory came first. Me at 9 years old, in the dead of winter. Ethan was 13, taller than me, faster, already learning how to turn his weight into a weapon. We'd been arguing over the last packet of hot chocolate. He shoved me toward the garage, laughing as I stumbled over the threshold. Before I could step back inside, he slammed the door shut and twisted the lock. It was barely insulated out there. The air was sharp, each breath a sting. My boots were too thin. I'd pounded on the door until my hands were red and numb, shouting for Mom, for Dad. No one came. When they finally did, hours later, my mother scolded me for playing too rough and told Ethan to be nicer to your sister. He'd smirked behind her back. I learned 2 things that day. The cold could seep into your bones faster than you thought, and my pain was never going to be urgent to them. Then came 15. It was summer, a sweltering July afternoon. Ethan and I were alone in the house while Mom and Dad went to some charity lunch. I was coming down the stairs when he stuck his foot out. It wasn't an accident. I went flying, landing hard on my hip. The pain was so sharp I couldn't breathe. When my parents got home, I told them what happened. My father didn't look up from the mail. My mother said, "You're too sensitive. I'm sure it was an accident." But Ethan had stood just behind her, his mouth curling into that same smug smile I'd see again years later in the kitchen. He knew, and I knew. At 22, I was back home for the summer, working double shifts at the local diner to save for grad school. My parents were talking to Ethan about a loan to help him start a landscaping business. I walked into the room mid-conversation, and Mom stopped speaking. "We're discussing something important," she said. "Go make yourself useful in the kitchen." I never heard another word about it. Months later, I learned they'd co-signed the loan and used part of the family savings to fund it. When I asked why I hadn't been included, Dad told me, "You weren't around enough to deserve a say." It didn't matter that I'd been the one sending them money when the furnace broke the winter before. In their eyes, I was always the outsider. Those moments weren't isolated. They were threads in a web I hadn't wanted to see until now. Standing in my tiny bathroom, I could almost feel them wrapping tighter. Every dismissal, every gaslight, every time they turned me into the problem instead of acknowledging the harm. My phone buzzed on the counter, jerking me back to the present. A text from my older cousin, Claire. "Hey, just let it go. You know how Ethan gets." Let it go. 2 days ago, I might have swallowed the hurt, told myself it wasn't worth the fight, just like I'd been doing for years. But looking at my reflection now, I knew that letting it go was exactly how we'd all gotten here. I wrapped an ice pack in a dish towel and pressed it gently to my cheek. It didn't help much, but it gave my hands something to do while my mind started to shift from memory to plan. I grabbed a notebook from the drawer by my bed, a small spiral-bound thing I usually kept for grocery lists, and sat down at the table. November 25th, 2024, orbital bruise, left side, lower lip laceration, mid-back soreness from blunt impact, incident, physical assault by male sibling during family gathering. The words looked strange on paper, like they belonged to someone else. But once they were there, I couldn't stop. Age 9, locked in garage in sub-zero temperatures. Age 15, tripped downstairs, parents dismissed injury. Age 22, excluded from financial discussions, undermined in household decisions. Age 27, called unstable, after disagreeing with father during holiday dinner. Age 34, struck in face, prevented from calling police. By the time I stopped, the list filled 3 pages. It was sobering, seeing it all laid out. In the hospital where I worked, a pattern like this would have triggered a mandatory report, but because it was just family, it had never counted. I stared at the pages until the words started to blur. Then I flipped to a clean sheet and wrote in big, deliberate letters, "This ends with me." That night, I dug through the storage boxes in my closet. There was an old shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside, a photo of me at 12, my smile crooked because of a swollen lip, a folded note from Ethan that said, "You're not worth the air you breathe," my silver necklace, the clasp still broken, a medical discharge paper from when I'd been treated for accidental bruising, language my parents had insisted on. I spread them out on the floor, arranging them like puzzle pieces. Each one was proof. Each one was a counterweight to the years I'd been told my memory was wrong, my reactions too big, my feelings invalid. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just holding mementos. I was holding evidence. The air outside had turned sharp by the time I stepped onto my balcony for a breath. The ocean was invisible in the darkness, but I could hear it. The steady rush of waves against rock, a rhythm older and stronger than any of us. I thought about every time I'd been told to get over it, every time I'd swallowed the truth just to keep the peace, and I thought about how peace had never actually been the goal in my family. Control had. In the cold night air, with the smell of salt water and the creak of the old wooden railing under my hands, I made myself another promise. I wasn't going to let this pattern continue, not for me, and not for anyone else. The morning after I wrote the list, I woke up with the same knot in my stomach I'd gone to bed with. It wasn't the kind of knot that goes away with coffee or a walk. This one was made of years, of slights, bruises, cold stares, and all the times I'd been told I was imagining it. For most of my life, I'd been told to just move on, but moving on had only ever meant letting it happen again. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers drumming against the wood. The list was still there, folded in half as if hiding the words might soften them. It didn't. I knew that if I put it in a drawer, I'd be doing exactly what they expected, pretending nothing had happened. So instead, I pulled my laptop toward me. The first place I looked was my email archive. I typed Ethan's name into the search bar. Pages of results popped up. Some were benign, birthday reminders, shared photos of nieces and nephews. But sprinkled between them were the little paper cuts that had bled over the years, messages where he'd mocked me for missing family events, chain emails from Mom forwarding inspirational quotes about forgiveness right after we'd argued, and one from Dad telling me I should apologize to your brother and make things right, after Ethan had shoved me into a wall during a barbecue. I saved them all into a folder labeled Project Horizon. Next was the storage unit. I kept one across town, a 10 by 10 metal box stacked with the leftovers of a life, old furniture, out-of-season clothes, and the pieces of my past I hadn't wanted to throw away but couldn't bear to look at every day. It was snowing by the time I got there, fat flakes sticking to my coat as I fumbled with the lock. Inside, my breath came out in white clouds. I switched on the single hanging bulb and stared at the stacks of boxes. Halfway through the pile, I found the one I was looking for, a plastic tub labeled Personal. Inside was the silver necklace Ethan had broken last year, tucked into a small velvet pouch. There were old photo albums, too. I flipped through them slowly, my fingertips leaving faint marks on the glossy pages. Most of the photos were what you'd expect. Holidays, school plays, birthdays. But I saw it now. How often I was at the edge of the frame, blurred, half-cropped, or missing entirely. One photo stopped me cold. It was from my 12th birthday. I was wearing a party hat, my smile just a little too tight. And there, if you looked closely enough, was the shadow of a bruise under my eye. I scanned the image on my phone and saved it. Evidence didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered. When I got home, I spread everything across the living room floor. Emails, photos, notes, the list. I took pictures of each item, making sure the timestamps and details were visible. Then I backed them up to an encrypted drive and a cloud folder. I'd learned in nursing that you always double document. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. If it's not stored in two places, it's as good as gone. That night, as I was labeling the files, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a voice memo from my old phone, dated 4 years ago. I clicked play. It was the sound of my mother's voice, sharp, cutting. You think anyone's going to believe you? You've always been the problem, Rachel. Always. In the background, there was the faint sound of a door slamming. My breath caught. I didn't even remember recording it. I stared at the waveform on the screen for a long time before dragging it into the Project Horizon folder. I didn't have a plan yet, not a full one, but I knew that when the time came, I wasn't going to show up with just my memory and my word. I was going to have proof. The next day at work, I kept my head down during my shift in the ER. My coworkers noticed the bruise but didn't press, except Zoe, a new nurse barely out of school. She handed me a coffee before I went in to see my first patient. "Rough night?" she asked gently. I hesitated. Something like that. She didn't push. That small mercy, a question without judgment, felt like more support than I'd had from my family in years. On my lunch break, I slipped outside to the staff parking lot, the air so cold it burned my lungs. I called my friend from college, Naomi, someone far removed from my family's circle. "I'm putting together a record," I told her. There was a pause. "Rachel, are you going after them?" "I'm protecting myself," I said. "And maybe someone else, if it comes to that." Naomi didn't say, "Be careful," or "Think about the consequences." She just said, "Tell me what you need." That night, I dug deeper. I went through my old journals, scanning pages where I'd scribbled about fights, injuries, and the quiet wars waged over dinner tables. I tagged them by year, adding them to the timeline I was building. I found old text messages on a backup drive. Ethan calling me a waste of space. Mom telling me to stop embarrassing the family. Dad accusing me of holding grudges. Each file I saved felt like another brick in a wall I'd been too afraid to build before. By midnight, the wall was standing, not finished, but solid enough to lean on. I sat back on the couch, the room lit only by the glow of my laptop. On the screen, the folder Project Horizon had 87 items: photos, audio clips, emails, scans, and written statements. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was clarity. For the first time in years, the gaslight had gone out, and I could see exactly what had been done to me. Before I shut the laptop, I opened a blank document and typed what they took from me: my voice, my credibility, my place in my own family. What they didn't take: my memory, my proof, my choice to speak. I read it twice, then saved it. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I finally turned off the lights and went to bed. Outside, snow was falling again, muffling the sounds of the street. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I'd started. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. Not anymore. It was the quiet understanding that I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. If you want, I can move straight into part 4 at the same expanded cinematic style so the momentum of Rachel's story stays strong. Do you want me to continue into part 4 now? It had been a week since I'd started Project Horizon. My apartment was still littered with evidence. Printed emails stacked on the coffee table, old photos clipped with sticky notes, my notebook lying open like it was waiting for more. The bruise around my eye had started to fade into a sickly yellow. I thought maybe the worst of it was over. Then my phone rang. It was Lily, my niece, Ethan's daughter, 16 years old. Her voice was thin, trembling. "Aunt Rachel, can I come over?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, a small intake of breath. "Not really." When she showed up 20 minutes later, she was wearing a sweatshirt with the hood pulled tight. She wouldn't meet my eyes. We sat at the kitchen table. I made her tea, because that's what you do when you don't know where to start. She wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. "It was Dad," she said finally. She stopped, chewing the inside of her cheek. "He got mad because I didn't answer a text fast enough. He grabbed my arm hard." I stared at her, feeling that old familiar pressure in my chest. She pushed the sleeve up. Dark, finger-shaped bruises bloomed across her skin. My mind went white hot. I wanted to storm over there. I wanted to drag Ethan out into the snow and make him answer for every time he'd done this. To me, to her, to anyone. But instead, I took a slow breath. "Lily, has this happened before?" She nodded, barely. "Yeah. He loses it sometimes. But Grandma says I shouldn't talk back, and Grandpa says that's just how he is." The words dropped into the silence between us like stones into deep water. I thought about my own bruises over the years, how I'd learned to cover them with makeup, with long sleeves, with silence. And here she was, 16, already being told to swallow it down, already learning that in our family, pain was just part of the deal. Not this time. "This ends with me," I said, more to myself than to her, but Lily heard it. She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer right away. I took out my phone, opened Project Horizon, and slid it across the table. She scrolled, her eyes widening as she saw the photos, the notes, the recordings. "You kept all this?" she whispered. "Yes, because I knew one day I might need to show someone." Her hands tightened around the phone. "I don't want to go back there tonight." "You won't," I said. "Not if I have anything to do with it." That night, Lily slept in my guest room. I stayed up, pacing between the kitchen and the living room, going over the same thought again and again. If I did nothing, this would keep going. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The first step was to give my parents a chance they didn't deserve, but one I needed to take so no one could say I hadn't. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp. "What is it, Rachel?" "Lily's with me. I know what Ethan did. You have 72 hours to tell the truth. To her, to me, to anyone who will listen. If you don't, I will." There was a long silence. Then, "You're making a big mistake." "No," I said. "I've made plenty. Staying quiet was one of them." I hung up before she could answer. For the next 3 days, I heard nothing. No calls, no apologies, no sudden change of heart. I wasn't surprised. On the 73rd hour, I put on my coat, grabbed my folder, and drove to my parents' house. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked up the porch steps. The front door was already open, like they'd been expecting me. Inside, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. My father was by the window, staring out at the yard. Ethan wasn't there. "Where's Lily?" I asked. My mother's lips tightened. "With her father, where she belongs." My heart pounded. "She belongs somewhere she's safe." My father turned then, his voice low. "You're poisoning this family, Rachel." I stepped closer. "You've been poisoning it for decades." And then I heard it. From down the hall, Lily's voice, small, muffled. I followed the sound, my parents shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. She was in her old bedroom, sitting on the bed, tears streaking her face. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. "They said you lied, that you make things up, that you're just angry all the time." I took her hands. "That's what they do when they're scared the truth will come out." I walked her out to my car. My parents didn't try to stop me. Maybe they knew it was too late. Maybe they were still underestimating me. Either way, as we pulled out of the driveway, I felt the weight of something shifting. They weren't in control anymore. That night, I added Lily's statement to Project Horizon. I took photos of her bruises with her permission and saved them in 3 separate places. When I closed my laptop, I looked over at her sleeping on the couch, curled under a blanket. I thought about the promise I'd made, and for the first time, I knew exactly how I was going to keep it. By the next morning, my decision was no longer a question. I wasn't just holding evidence anymore. I was holding a lifeline for me and for Lily, and I wasn't going to keep it locked away. The timing worked in my favor. Our small town had a monthly community forum in the parish hall, a mix of announcements, charity updates, and the occasional heated zoning dispute. Attendance was always decent. People came for the free coffee and left with whatever gossip they'd collected along the way. If I was going to speak, I needed a place where the truth couldn't be twisted in a private kitchen or buried under family matters. I needed witnesses. 2 nights later, I walked into the parish hall with Lily by my side. The old hardwood floors creaked under our boots. The smell of percolated coffee drifted from the refreshment table. Folding chairs were lined in neat rows facing a small podium under the fluorescent lights. A few heads turned when we came in. Whispers followed. My parents were there, sitting 2 rows back. Ethan was beside them, jaw tight, arms crossed. I'd half expected them not to show, but maybe they thought I was bluffing. The moderator was midway through the agenda when I raised my hand. "Rachel Donovan," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart thudded in my chest. "I have something to share before we adjourn." A ripple went through the room. The moderator hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." I stepped to the podium, setting my folder down. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder now. "I've kept quiet about something for a long time. Too long, but silence doesn't protect anyone. It only protects the people causing the harm." I could feel my parents' eyes drilling into me. I didn't look at them. I opened the folder and took out a small audio recorder. "This is my mother's voice," I said. 4 years ago." I pressed play. Her voice crackled through the speakers. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" "You've always been the problem, Rachel. Always." A murmur went through the crowd. I let the words hang in the air before hitting stop. "This is my niece, Lily," I continued, gesturing for her to join me. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stood tall. "She came to me last week with these." I lifted the photos of her bruised arm, projected on the small screen behind us. Gasps erupted. "This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. I know because it's the same pattern I lived through for decades." I laid the photos and documents on the podium, printed emails, old photos, written accounts. The backbone of Project Horizon. This is what abuse looks like when it's been covered up for years, I said, scanning the room. It looks like dismissing a child's injuries. It looks like calling them too sensitive. It looks like deciding whose pain counts and whose doesn't, all to protect the abuser's comfort. Someone in the third row, Mrs. Harper, raised her hand. "Rachel, are you saying your brother?" "Yes," I said. "My brother and my parents, who enabled it." The room shifted. People glanced toward my parents. My mother's mouth was set in a thin line. My father stared at the floor. Ethan's face flushed red. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about making sure no one else in our family, in this town, has to learn to hide their bruises and swallow their truth just to keep the peace." From the back, a man stood up. It was Mr. Collins, one of my father's longtime fishing buddies. "I remember when Rachel came to school with that black eye," he said slowly. "Your mom told us she'd walked into a door. Didn't look like that to me." More voices followed. A neighbor recalled hearing shouting and crying when I was a teenager. An old teacher mentioned the time I'd missed a week of school after a fall. Each account landed like another crack in the wall my parents had built. Ethan finally spoke, his voice loud, cutting through the murmurs. "You're making this up. You've always been—" I didn't let him finish. "Careful, Ethan. There are more recordings, and you know exactly what's on them." His jaw worked, but no words came out. By the time I stepped down from the podium, the air in the room felt different, heavier but cleaner somehow. My parents left without a word. Ethan followed, his boots slamming against the floor. Lily and I stayed. People came up to us quietly, some offering hugs, others just a squeeze of the hand. A few told me about their own family stories, ones they'd never dared speak before. Later that night, back at my apartment, Lily curled up on the couch under a blanket. "You think it'll change anything?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Not everything, not right away. But you can't unhear the truth once it's out there. And now they know, and everyone else knows, we're not afraid to say it." She nodded slowly. For the first time in days, she looked lighter. I added the meeting transcript and new witness statements to Project Horizon before I went to bed. As I closed the folder, I realized something. I wasn't carrying this alone anymore. And that was the first real crack in their power. The morning after the parish hall meeting, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. At first, I thought it might be work calling me in for an extra ER shift, but when I reached for it, I saw the screen. 38 missed calls, 17 new voicemails. Some were from numbers I didn't recognize. Some were from neighbors. Some were from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. The first voicemail was my mother's voice, sharp as glass. "You've humiliated us. I hope you're happy. You'll regret this." The second was from Mrs. Harper, the woman who'd spoken up in the meeting. "Rachel, I just wanted to say, you were brave. I believe you. If you need me to say that again, to anyone, I will." The third was Ethan's voice, low, threatening. "You think this is over? It's just starting." By the time I got to the kitchen, Lily was already awake, sitting at the table with her knees pulled to her chest. She looked up from her phone. "They're posting about you on Facebook," she said. "Some people are defending you, some not so much." I poured coffee into my mug, the bitter smell filling the room. "That's what happens when the truth comes out," I said. "It shakes people. They have to pick a side." I knew public confrontation was just the first step. If I wanted real protection, for me and for Lily, I needed to make it official. That afternoon, I called Naomi, my old college friend. She worked in a Boston law firm now. I told her everything. "I can't take your case myself," she said, "but I can refer you to someone in Portland who specializes in domestic and family abuse cases. They'll know exactly what to do." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small office that smelled faintly of lemon polish, across from a woman named Karen Blake. She had kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush. Karen flipped through the binder I'd brought. Project Horizon printed, tabbed, and organized. "You've been thorough," she said. "This is more documentation than most people ever come in with." I almost smiled. "Occupational hazard. Nurses chart everything." She nodded. "We have a few options. First, we file for a protection order for both you and Lily. That's immediate. Next, we can press charges. Assault, harassment, child endangerment. The evidence supports it." "Will it stick?" I asked. Karen looked me in the eye. "It's a strong case, but it will get ugly before it gets better. They'll try to discredit you. They'll try to make you the problem." I let out a short breath. That's been the story of my life. We filed that same day. The next 48 hours were a blur. Paperwork, sworn statements, photographs submitted as exhibits. Lily was quiet through most of it, answering Karen's questions with small nods or single words. On the third day, we stood before a judge in a wood-paneled courtroom. Ethan wasn't there, but his lawyer was. A slick man in a navy suit who kept using the phrase, "family misunderstanding." Karen was steady, methodical, walking the judge through the evidence. When she played the audio clip of my mother's voice, the lawyer tried to object. The judge overruled. When it was over, the judge granted a temporary protection order. Ethan was barred from contacting either of us directly or through anyone else. It was a victory, but not a final one. The backlash came fast. Someone slashed my tires outside the hospital. A brick was thrown through the window of my apartment building one night, wrapped in a note that read, "Shut your mouth." At the grocery store, a woman I'd known since childhood looked me up and down and said, "Your poor parents. You've turned the whole town against them." But for every person like her, there was someone else. A neighbor leaving fresh bread at my door, an old teacher sending a handwritten note that said simply, "I believe you." Lily was the one I worried about most. Her friends were divided, just like the adults. Some called her brave. Others accused her of betraying her family. One night, she knocked on my bedroom door. "Do you ever wish you hadn't said anything?" she asked. I thought about it, about how much easier it had been to keep my head down, to pretend nothing happened, about how safe it could feel to be invisible. "No," I said finally. "I wish I'd said it sooner." Karen called me the next week with news. Ethan's lawyer reached out. "He wants to settle. No trial, no criminal charges, if you drop the public claims." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "That's not happening." "Good," Karen said, "because I think we can win this in court." The court date was set for March. Until then, we had to live with the tension. The sideways glances at the diner, the whispers in the post office line, the knowledge that Ethan was somewhere nearby waiting for his chance to twist the story again. But we also had allies now. People who'd stayed silent for years were starting to speak up. A retired police officer came forward about calls he'd responded to at my parents' house. A former neighbor remembered seeing me on the porch with ice pressed to my face when I was 17. Every new statement was another brick in the foundation of the case. One evening, after adding the latest witness testimony to Project Horizon, I closed my laptop and looked at Lily. "This is going to be a fight," I said, "but it's one we can win. And when we do, we won't just be free from them. We'll have shown everyone that it's possible to break the pattern." She gave me a small, tired smile. "I want that." "So do I." The night before the trial, I took out the silver necklace from its pouch, the one Ethan had broken last year. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that courtroom, not just as someone who'd been hurt, but as someone who had fought back. And this time, the story wouldn't be theirs to tell. The day of the trial, the courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. Every footstep echoed against the high ceilings. I wore a navy blazer and my silver necklace, the one that had been broken and mended. Lily sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. Across the aisle, Ethan avoided my eyes. My parents sat behind him. My mother's lips were pressed so tightly together they'd lost all color. My father looked tired, smaller somehow. The proceedings moved slowly. Karen was calm and precise, laying out the timeline, the photos, the recordings. She called witnesses one by one, Mrs. Harper, my old teacher, the retired police officer. Each story fit into the larger picture, like pieces of a puzzle finally locking into place. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat down. My heart pounded, but my voice didn't shake. I told the judge about the night Ethan's knee met my face, about the phone ripped from my hands, about my mother's cold dismissal and my father's silence. I told him about Lily's bruises, her fear, her courage. And I told him about the necklace, how it had been a gift from a patient, how it had broken in that kitchen, how I'd carried it as a reminder that my life mattered, even when my family acted like it didn't. Ethan's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, emotional, too dramatic. I met every question with the truth. Calm, direct, unshakable. Lily took the stand next. She spoke quietly but clearly. "I don't want to go back," she said. "I want to feel safe. My aunt makes me feel safe." That was the moment I saw the judge's expression shift. It wasn't pity. It was conviction. By late afternoon, the judge delivered his ruling. The protection order was made permanent. Ethan was found guilty of assault and child endangerment. He was sentenced to probation, mandatory counseling, and barred from contact with either of us. It wasn't prison, but it was accountability. And in our family, that was unheard of. When the gavel came down, a strange quiet settled over me. I'd expected a rush of triumph, but what I felt was something softer. Release. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun was already dipping low, turning the snow a pale gold. Reporters lingered near the steps, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Ms. Donovan," one called, "do you have anything to say?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "Family is supposed to protect you. When they don't, you have the right to protect yourself. And telling the truth is the first step." I didn't wait for more questions. Lily and I walked down the steps together, our boots crunching in sync. The weeks that followed were quieter. Not peaceful, not yet, but quieter. The phone calls stopped. The threatening notes stopped. People still stared in the grocery store, but some of them smiled now. One afternoon, Lily came home from school with a grin. "Someone told me I was brave today," she said. "They said you were, too." I smiled back. "We are." Spring came early that year. The snow melted into soft ground and the gulls returned to the harbor. I started running again along the coastal trail, the salt air clean in my lungs. Lily signed up for art classes at the community center. One evening, I found her at the kitchen table, sketching the lighthouse down the coast. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just something that stands and shines even when the storms come." I looked at her, my chest tightening. "That's you," I said. "That's us." On the first warm day of May, I took the necklace from around my neck and set it in Lily's hand. "This belonged to someone who taught me that we all leave a mark," I told her. "You've already left one, and it's a good one." She fastened it around her neck, the silver catching the light. That night, I sat at my desk and opened Project Horizon one last time. Every file, every photo, every recording was there. A record of pain, yes, but also of persistence. I added one final entry. Verdict delivered. Safety secured. Cycle broken. Then I closed the folder. Sometimes I still hear my mother's voice in my head, sharp and dismissive. Sometimes I still feel the weight of Ethan's knee, the sting of the cold tile. But those are echoes now, not chains. And every time I see Lily walking out the door with her sketchbook, her head high, I know the truth. We didn't just survive. We changed the ending. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on distant fields. They're fought at our own kitchen tables. Rachel's fight wasn't just for herself. It was for Lily and for anyone who's been told to stay quiet. She proved that speaking the truth can break a cycle that's lasted generations. And while the scars remain, so does the strength that carried her through. Remember, your voice matters. Your story matters. And when you choose to stand, you may just light the way for someone else. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, your love has power, and your presence changes everything.